Ottawa and Alberta have now signed an energy agreement under new project rules set by the Carney Liberals. And because the process is new, you might be wondering what's next.
We look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen. But there's a lot more work to do, and very much in the spirit of partnership.
Well, that's Prime Minister Mark Carney just moments after signing a memorandum of understanding on energy with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. For more on the deal, how it will work, we're joined from Vancouver this morning by James Moore, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. James, first of all, thank you for waking up so early for us. And second, it's nice to see you again. You were my panel mate during our federal election coverage, so good to have you here on the show.
Pleasure's mine.
Okay, this deal lays out the steps both sides need to take before this pipeline can actually move forward. There are some dates and timeline attached to this deal, which is also something new in these announcements. April 1st, Alberta will increase its industrial carbon tax. Canada will then end its clean electricity rules for that province. After, Canada and Alberta will then sign a three-way deal with the Pathways Plus carbon capture project. And then finally, Alberta will submit its pipeline proposal to the Major Projects Office by Canada Day, July 1st. So before April's election, Conservatives like Preston Manning were predicting, a vote for the Liberals was a vote to leave the country. We spent a lot of time on the show looking at this, this feeling from Alberta that they weren't being heard. Is Alberta finally being heard by Ottawa, or at least is that how they feel?
I think unquestionably, yes. That process that you described, by the way, it's a little more complicated than that, and it requires a proponent as well to step forward and to try to lasso all of these constituent parts together. But to your question, though, look, I'm 49. For much of my adult life, the tensions between particularly Alberta, but a lot of Western Canada and Ottawa, and particularly under Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, has been red hot and really uncomfortable and really not healthy for the country. And I think in a moment of leadership yesterday by both Prime Minister Carney and by Premier Danielle Smith, both of them took, frankly, some political risk. And, Mark Carney has 2 seats in the province of Alberta, 20 seats in the province of British Columbia. He lost Stephen Guilbeault, one of the mainstays of the Trudeau government and a cabinet minister in Mark Carney's government from the province of Quebec, a leader in the environmental movement in that province. He's taken a big political risk here for probably not a lot of political upside, because I think he genuinely thinks that the tensions between Alberta and Ottawa are unsustainable, not healthy, and not good for the country in the face of the threats that we have from Donald Trump in order to get the best value for our economy. So I think it was a real moment of leadership for the Prime Minister, and also Danielle Smith, who could have taken the path of a lot of other premiers through the sweep of Canadian history and just stood there with her arms folded and said, we're never going to get anything from Ottawa. We have to do our own thing and build a fortress in Alberta and just constantly fight with Ottawa. There's a lot of good politics in that. But there's not a lot of good statecraft and statesmanship and economic benefits to Alberta in doing that. So both Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney, I think, deserve a lot of credit for taking some political risk with not a lot of political upside and trying to find a way here to demonstrate how business can be done in Canada when it comes to energy projects.
I'm going to bring up really quickly, because you just mentioned it, the exit of Mr. Guilbeault from Cabinet. You said yesterday to Vash Kapelas that this is the end of the Trudeau-era Liberals, at least in Cabinet. What else does this signal to you?
Well, it's some of that political risk. Prime Minister Carney became Prime Minister in April of this year, in part because a lot of progressives and New Democrats who really don't like Donald Trump and really don't like Pierre Poilievre either said, you know what, Mark Carney is the best that we've got, and we're hopeful, and we're gonna make a bet that a lot of our progressive values can be housed within a Liberal government. And Stephen Guilbeault leaving and being very clear in a pretty aggressive, multi-page letter about why he's leaving Cabinet really puts at risk a lot of the progressive voters. And I think what part of the political calculus here for the Prime Minister is he's making a bit of a wager here that he might be prepared to burn some of that political capital with a cohort of voters who voted for him in this last election campaign in exchange for some new voters who might not traditionally vote Liberal, but see in Mark Carney somebody who is moderate and trying to straddle the broad middle of the political spectrum and trying to get things done for the good of the country in spite of some of the political risk. It's a bit of a balancing act, and it's a bit of a bait and switch, and there's no guarantees that it'll work. But if this continues to go, that he continues to bleed support from people who have environment, climate change, and a lot of hard left progressive values who don't like a pipeline and don't like this embracing with Danielle Smith, Prime Minister Carney is taking a real political risk here that he may not find those new voters that he so needs in order to get him from 170 seats that he has right now to over 172 and get him a majority in this parliament. You
mentioned risk, and what he's really doing is gambling on himself and his ability to find a common middle ground for all parties. So let's talk about BC. The MOU says talks with British Columbian Indigenous communities are going to happen, obviously before July 1st. As a former BC MP, you understand the deep feelings towards pipelines in that province. What is it going to take? What does this Prime Minister need to do in order to find common ground and relationship for this deal to move forward? We've already heard from coastal Indigenous leaders who said, you've said in this MOU that there will be ownership and benefits for Indigenous groups. We don't want them.
Yeah, and they may, frankly, they may face a wall. It depends on the nature of the project. It depends on the kind of partnerships that might be engaged. It will depend on the technology and the timelines. It'll depend on which coastal First Nations you're talking about. And in British Columbia, Premier Eby may not be in office forever. So I mean, there's a long process here in order to move forward with an actual pipeline project. But it's not just the idea of having a new pipeline across the vastness of northern British Columbia out to Kitimat or out to Prince Rupert. There's also the possibility here of expanding TMX, which is the pipeline that currently exists in Vancouver, which is owned by the Government of Canada, by you, the taxpayers, us, the taxpayers of the country. There's also a provision here to expand that and to grow its capacity, to have more tanker traffic in and around Vancouver, which the NDP government in British Columbia says that they're open to doing and welcoming that capacity. So the current pipeline in British Columbia, I'm told, is at about 90% capacity, but there's an opportunity, and 97% of everything that we sell in oil and gas goes into the United States. So we want to diversify our markets, get more capacity so we can continue to build wealth and to offset some of, frankly, the lost wealth that we may have in this country because of the threat of Donald Trump on tariffs and trade. So, Mark Carney is trying to, I think, do something here and demonstrate some forward progress. And, a pipeline across northern BC is going to have a lot of challenges, but we do have some capacity still to be exploited and more capacity into Vancouver as well. So, but the idea is we're trying to get onto a footing of grow and to build and to move forward and to have a cooperative relationship between Ottawa and Alberta and Western provinces. And yesterday was a good day on that front with Alberta, but there's still a lot of work to be done with coastal communities and with British Columbia.
James, we're going to have to end it there, but I take your point. You and I are around the same age. I was raised in Alberta. Never did I ever think I would see a Liberal Prime Minister and an Alberta Premier shaking hands, and the Prime Minister then getting standing O's at the Petroleum Club meeting about energy in that province. It is a big feat that we watched yesterday. Anyway, thank you so much, James, for joining us from BC this morning.
Take care of yourself.